last module, we looked at search engines, this incredibly powerful mechanism that we have for seeking out information on the internet, given this information superabundance. And we saw the way in which search engines worked and potentially their limitations based on the way that they worked. Now we want to turn our attention to another mechanism, another means of dealing with information superabundance, particularly on the internet. And that is the creation of news feeds or news alerts, oftentimes through social media groups. All of these news feeds, but particularly the ones that are associated with social media platforms, rely heavily on personalization to decide what to send to you. So they'll give you a news feed so that every time you log on, or they'll notify you every time something comes up that you're interested in, or they think you'll be interested in. And they do that based on a personalization algorithm. And those personalization algorithms take a bunch of information into account to decide what they think, that is the social media platform or the algorithm itself, thinks you really want to see. So oftentimes they'll start with stated preferences. What did you say you were interested in? What did you say you wanted to find out about? If it's a social media network, they'll look at what the other members of the network that you're connected with looked at. What did they like? What did they share? And they'll pass that on to you because your friends' interests, they assume, will also be things that interest you. And they'll also look at your history. What in the past did you click on and read? Did you read something on a topic from more than one source? Did you like something? Did you just delete something from your newsfeed without reading it? How much time did you spend on it? And so on. It will take all of those factors into account, and it'll try and start to give you those things that score very high on this. Now you might say, well, whoa, that sounds fantastic. Here I've got this automated mechanism that is gearing itself towards my own interests and desires and presenting me without any effort on my part at all with just the stuff that I really would want. Of course, it's not quite that simple. Personalization is a tool used by these social media news feeds and other automated alerts precisely because they want you to spend a lot of time on their platform. They want you to log into their news organization and so on. And so they're trying to find things that will interest you regardless of whether or not they're that good for you. And so you can sort of think about it this way, right? Imagine if your diet got determined by a sort of personalization algorithm. And, you know, maybe you're the sort of person that really likes to eat healthy and limits your calories and so on and so forth. Well, then that personalization algorithm will take those things into account. But if you've got a sweet tooth, say, or you like fatty foods or foods that are high in cholesterol, or if you break up with your boyfriend or girlfriend and you go on an eating binge, all of those things now get factored into what you're going to eat. And so if you've got a sweet tooth, you'll get more and more and more sweets. If you've got love for fatty foods, you'll get more and more fatty foods. It won't take into account other factors because it's trying to give you the stuff that you think will be the most yummy. And so personalization algorithms have this effect that they really are trying to basically ply you with mind candy. And so in this way, they can introduce a bunch of problems for you as someone who wants to be a well-informed and educated critical thinker. So to illustrate this, let's look at a couple of graphs here from this study done by the Pew Media Insight Group called the Personal News Cycle, and it was done in 2014. So if you look at this first graph here, it says, where did you discover news during the last week? So what medium gave you news? Did you first become aware of some event and so on? And it starts off and it says, well, directly from news organizations. And then it goes to word of mouth, search engines, online, news organizations, aggregators, sharing news with friends, social media, electronic news alerts. Electronic news alerts are the least common. They're just barely above 30% here. Now let's click over to people's perception of what they can trust and not trust. So the green is trust very much or completely. The gray is trust slightly or not at all. Now here, the runaway winner is electronic news alerts, the thing that the fewest number of people in that last graph actually were made aware of events through. So the thing that they trust the most is the thing that they get news from the least. Then there are news organizations. That was that first slot. Then we have search engines, followed by sharing news with friends, online news organizations, word of mouth, and social media. So when you start to look at this, you realize that 30 and 40% of people report that they're getting news, say from word of mouth, from social media, where they are distrustful of that source, and yet they're still hearing about stuff for the first time from that source. Now, of course, this isn't necessarily bad, but studies that have been done on personalized news feeds versus traditional kinds of media suggest that it's not so great. So this was a study done around the time of the 2016 election by a news organization called BuzzFeed, and it analyzed the contents of articles in differently oriented news feeds on Facebook. And here's what their results were. So if you look at that top result there, it's an evaluation of the general accuracy of information that reported through mainstream news outlets. And so it reports that about 0.7% were a mix of true and false, about 94.8% were mostly true, and about 4.5% were, I don't know, puppies in baskets or children dancing in water fountains, things like that. They just had no factual content. And then if you look at the news feeds that were rated either leaning towards the left politically or towards the right politically, what you discover is that those personalized news feeds, they have a much lower percentage of mostly true information. So the left-leaning one is 56.3%, the right 47.9%. And there's a increase in the mix of true and false, both the left and the right. The left is 14.4, the right 25.4, and importantly, there's a whole bunch of mostly false now, whereas there was none reported in the analysis of the mainstream media. The left-leaning ones had 4.7% mostly false information. The right-leaning ones 12.3% mostly false information. Now, if you did this study, again, those numbers wouldn't be exactly the same. It's not particularly important whether the left or the right has a higher percentage. What is important, though, is that as you start to personalize your newsfeed, what you get is increases in the mix of true and false and mostly false.